I'm Cameron Harris. I'm Senior Editor at Bioware Montreal. Can everybody hear us in the back?
Yes.
Yeah. Cool. And I am moderating this panel, Inside Story, Player Participation Within Narrative. So first we're going to do introductions to the panelists. Then you can imagine the slides that we will have, and we will describe them. And then we're going to dive right in, but we're going to leave plenty of room for questions at the end. All right, so who are you guys?
I'll tell you who I am. My name's Anna McGill. I'm the creative director for Project Untold, which is a series of visual novels I'm making in collaboration with Giant Space Cat out of Boston. And I'm here to talk to you guys about the inside story.
Hi, I'm Jesse Scoble. I am the creative design lead for Wizard 101, a family-friendly MMO.
Hi, I'm Anne LeMay, and I'm a writer at Bioware Montreal.
Hi, I'm Mikko Raukalahti from faraway Finland. I work for Remedy Entertainment as the story team manager is my actual title, but essentially I'm kind of in charge of all this story stuff.
So, slides-ish.
Yeah, so this panel, when we were trying to decide what we were going to talk about, we realized that we didn't understand ourselves what we meant by some of these terms. We were throwing things around like emergent gameplay versus emergent storytelling, and we decided that it would be very helpful if we let you know what we meant when we say those things. So essentially what we're talking about is making room in the game for players to have their own experiences and tell their own stories, and there's a couple of different ways they can do that, obviously. When we're talking about emergent gameplay, we're talking about things like game mods. Have any of you guys seen the Cat Apocalypse grinding level for TF2, for Team Fortress 2? Do you guys know what I'm talking about? Laser Cat? Right, so that's sort of an extreme example of that. You know, it's just an achievement map that people go into to grind. But someone took that idea and ran with it and created this just insane, godlike cat that shot bees out of its mouth and like zapped people with lasers and was basically unkillable. And it was absolutely memorable. You should look up the video if you haven't seen it. And that's the extreme end of emergent gameplay. It's like letting players do what they want with the game and create their own content. That's Laser Cat. I wish you could see that picture. It's gorgeous. There's also things like the home instances in MMOs. In Skyrim, for example, you can collect whatever you want there, and some people would hoard cheeses or different armor and completely fill their rooms with it. Now, if they had decided that they were the cheese hoarder and they made up a whole story about that, that would be emergent storytelling. But just collecting the cheese is emergent gameplay. And the same thing in Gone Home, someone took every single collectible in the game and gathered them into one room. Why? I don't know. I don't know what the purpose of that was, but that's how they chose to play that game. And so that would be, again, another example of emergent gameplay. Now, in terms of storytelling, MMOs and RPGs do this really well. You have games like Guild Wars 2 that let you pick your own storyline at the very beginning, and you choose your profession, your race, or whatever, and then that sort of blocks out a certain path for you in the game, and you've already gotten rid of a lot of content that you're not going to see because of those initial choices. And Bioware very famously has their conversation system, which influences your relationships and your path through the game. So again, these are ways that you can tell your own story within the framework of the existing game. Yeah, oh yeah, and Journey, this is a pretty picture. It's really pretty. It's the snow and the little journeyers drawing the heart in the snow at the end of the game. Sorry, spoiler for people. And that's just a way that you really can't communicate with people at all in the game except through peeping through these symbols. Then they gave you this blank canvas at the end where you can write whatever you want to communicate with the other player, and it was a really thoughtful way to allow players to tell a little bit of their own story within the game. So that's what we mean when we're talking about these things, and this is by no means a comprehensive list. It's just to give you an idea of where we're going to go with this.
So, Jesse, what are some of the ways that you, either you specifically or you as a game designer, leave room in your game or a game for player stories?
I think a lot of it is trying to remember, keep foremost in mind the player's action, what they bring to it is what makes the story live, right? What keeps us different from other forms of more passive entertainment. A lot of my work the last few years has been in MMOs, from Wizard 101 to City of Heroes, and these are games where, in a lot of ways, you don't want to put the player as the chosen one. although to be fair, in Wizard we kind of do that. But it's a game. These large player spaces are games of many, not one. And recognizing that, giving players kind of some tools, whether it's in character creation or large public spaces, gives them, I think, a sense of empowerment, a sense where they're able to fill in their own kind of stories and ideas to their characters. And when they are put in these shared spaces, big kind of public spaces, with other players, they want to kind of create these stories together. They want to kind of tell each other about their characters, and that helps kind of begin that process.
Yeah, so that process, as you say, it's expensive in terms of development time, development resource, and so on. And, since we work for Bioware, maybe you could say a little bit about why does it matter? Why do we do that? What do we get out of it? What does the player get out of having this emergent space to play in?
Speaking specifically for working on an RPG, because it really depends on the genre of game you're making and what the tools you have are. We come at this from a narrative-rich environment to start with. We also offer, crit path narrative. We offer a lot of story about squad mates. We basically give you what you have to play to get through the game, and then we add as much as we can that is optional. And most players will go and explore. And as soon as you hit exploration, or just letting people determine how they want to interact with the world, that's where they start making their own stories. And it doesn't matter. We just had the talk with Shoshana, and she was talking about players' personal experiences will influence how they perceive story, and it doesn't matter how you intend for things to be perceived. As soon as you put something there, every single player will bring a different aspect to it and a different interpretation to it. So, and that's the richness of it, right? Because then after that, you get to talk to people about it, people exchange about their experience, and they may have made all the same choices and come away with it with a totally different impression of what was going on, what happened, or how they felt about it. And that's where the richness of it comes in.
Cool. I'm just going to go down the panel with one more question so that everybody gets one. You guys jump in, whatever. So, Mickey, when we were doing prep for this panel, you said that you would like to talk a little bit about how Remedy, specifically, your experience there. Well, how does the development process and when the writer comes into it, influence how much emergent storytelling gets into a game? Can you speak a little bit about that?
Sure. Just to kind of take one step back briefly, I think one big difference between the kind of games we make at Remedy and the kind of games they make at Bioware, for example, is that we are mostly working in like a linear kind of environment where you go from A to B to C and you can't really deviate from the path too much. But one of the things that we try to do is try to still make the world as responsive as possible. So even though you don't have that kind of room to explore and you can't really affect the outcome that much most of the time, we still try to make sure that there's enough room for you to kind of see sort of snippets of the world that may not be directly relevant to the actual mission you're on at that given moment. And the way we kind of approach things right from the start, and this is a little unusual in the sort of like classic game development space, that we bring writers in right from the beginning. Like there is no situation where level designers just come up with a level by themselves and then we kind of conform to that. Like it's more like we're in a lot of cases, writers are kind of right in the beginning of the pipeline, and that means that we are very much in demand and are very easily also a bottleneck. But which is not a great position to be in, but and it makes everything a little slower. That's one reason why our games don't usually come out in just a couple of years. One of the things that we really try to do is create opportunities for players to kind of put the dots together. Like there's a lot of stuff that isn't directly relevant to what's happening, and we try to place as much content in the environment as we possibly can. And that may be something to discover. It might be written text, or it might be an audio clip, or it might be a scene that plays only if you do a certain sequence of things or something like that. Or it could be something as simple as just there's like a broken bottle and bullet holes on a wall, and you can figure out like what that means if you just take in the clues. But that's something that we kind of try to build as carefully as we can, because otherwise it's very easy for a linear game to be just about the character that you're playing, and everything else in the world is just kind of a very thin set dressing, and that's not really something that you want to have in a game like that if you also want to communicate this idea of a world that exists beyond the experience that you're currently having. So that's something that we really spend a lot of time on, and that also means that we iterate a lot when we're creating things. We just keep going over the same things over and over and over again, and that is very slow but also very rewarding once we actually have everything polished and in place.
Cool, cool. Well, that leads very well into the first free-for-all question, so everybody can pop in on this one. I feel like a game show host now.
Are there prizes?
There's always prizes when I moderate panels. So you talked about linear narrative. Does giving the player space to make their own stories, does that detract from the story you're trying to sell, to tell to players? Like, is there a tension there? And, you know, as a secondary, when is it useful to have a story on rails, so to speak, and strip away some of that narrative space that players can create?
Well, I think for us, it's a lot of our games are, you know, they're even named after the protagonist. Like you get Max Payne or you get Alan Wake, and they're very much about a specific person in a specific situation. And it's not really the kind of thing where we're not trying to let you create your own adventure. We're rather trying to construct an adventure that is as cool as we can possibly make it and kind of take you on this like very, you know, well-crafted ride. And the good thing about that is that we can control the experience, and then we can really we can time things the way we want to time them and make sure that you really get the, you know, the optimized version of that experience, which is very cool. But it does mean that some things like replay value kind of aren't necessarily there quite as much. I mean, there are people who watch movies over and over again, and there are people who play our games over and over again. But for most people, I think it's the kind of thing you play through it once and then you had that experience. Whereas something like, I think we do lose something in the whole thing where in, say, Mass Effect, you may want to play as, you know, the asshole shepherd or the sort of, you know, pure-hearted shepherd, and you get very different experiences. I mean, the sort of grand story is pretty much the same, but the way it unfolds is very different, and there's a lot of value in that. I think one of the downsides of that approach is that you also need a lot of people creating a lot of content, and in terms of, like, Remedy is a fairly small studio. Like, we have, I think, around 131 employees at this point, and that just means that there are very, very limits to how much content we can actually create in a game. And I think that's something that now that we are bigger than we used to be, we made Alan Wake with around, I don't know, 50, 60 people, and that was a much smaller game. Now we're working on Quantum Break, we actually do have more branching content there just because we have more people working on the content. So you do get a little bit more in the ways of kind of, I don't know, like affecting the experience. But I think still for us it's something that we kind of want to sit on at the reins of the whole experience. Like we don't go that much for the kind of thing where it's never sort of like a create your own story kind of thing with us. At least not yet, although we have been talking about that sort of thing too quite a bit. So
for us, for Wizard 101, Pirate 101, the replayability comes from not the linear story, which hits certain, you know, chapter breaks until we're able to put out more content, but it's from that shared space with the multiplayers, right? And so some of that starts kind of in-game, where people find their own things to do. They may hang out in the pet shop and they don't know yet how to hatch a pet. So a more experienced player comes along and kind of walks them through it, and then often friendships have kind of formed out of these things. You know, and then it expands. I think, like City of Heroes at the kind of its height, did a ton of user-created content where people could write their own missions and kind of build that, and that's, you know, very much a way of doing it. But even before that happened, you know, players got so into it. You know, a good friend of mine who is a very experienced writer, I mean, he would go out of his way to write basically City of Heroes fiction for us to publish, you know, and he did some great superhero stuff with that. And then I think you go even beyond that in sort of filling up the downtime, the replayability, and these connections become like real life connections, like people who go to BlizzCon, you know, hang out with their guild mates, to people who, you know, I've heard stories of people who, I guess it was in EverQuest, they spent so long doing the same kind of dungeon raid, you know, over and over and camping, that they became not just good friends, but they became, you know, a romantic relationship. I mean, it's a different sort of storytelling, but it all kind of has these roots of what do you bring to this game? What do you bring into this play space? How is it enriching your life? And I think that goes also to the, you know, it's expensive. Why do we do it? Well, you know, from the kind of bean counter perspective, the more people engage with your game and and kind of tie into it, you know, the more they're willing to spend on it, right? And as game designers and storytellers, the more, you know, they kind of fall in love with your world and characters, and you have this kind of cool shared experience with them.
Any other downsides that we can think about to having the emergent space?
To having the emergent space or
Yeah,
having it
like-
on Rails?
Well, either, I guess.
When the game is on Rails and you know you are just following one character through the story, it's a tough sell sometimes if the character is unlikable. Like we had that. I worked on a game called Murdered Soul Suspect, and everyone hated our main character. I mean, he was a real jerk, and he swore a lot. And he was a bad person, and it was all about his redemption in the afterlife. And he, in our early focus testing, people just despised him. I mean, he was dressed in like a fedora and a vest, which did not help. People kept calling him a douchebag, and you know, it was really unfortunate. So we had to do a lot more. We had to change his lines. We had to take out some of the swearing. We had to do a lot of stuff to make him likable because that impression is what people were going to have to live with throughout the game, and they weren't bringing anything of their own to it. They were just following his story, and if they didn't care about his story, then you know, there goes the entire game. So that would be the downside to the Rails, I would say.
Actually, a counterpoint to that,
Yeah.
I guess it's going to be Skyrim.
Yeah.
Because
well,
Skyrim, I played at 1% of the main crit path, and then I just veered and went right off into the wilderness, and that's where I spent about 50 hours. I didn't go back to the crit path. I didn't care about it, but I was having tons of fun in the game.
Yeah.
But there are people where you hit that friction where, like I think Shadows of Mordor, which does some really, really cool stuff on the kind of emergent gameplay, kind of crashes into the narrative, and there's certain points where it says, like, no, we're going to drag you back onto this. And I get why that is done from, you know, the design perspective, but I know people who that's turned them off. They're like, wait, no, I don't care about that story. I want to do my, damn, I have to do that to get the next level up. Okay, screw it, I'm done. I'm going to choose something else.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, there's one thing we had with Alan Wake was that the character is a kind of a dick. It's part. I mean, he's a dude who he's having a lot of personal troubles. He's got substance abuse issues and things like that, and he's trying to get better, but he's not better yet. And that's something that was really integral to the story. Like, he's a guy who has this darkness inside him, and then it kind of manifests in the real world around him, and it's more complicated than that, but that's kind of the core of it in some ways. And that was something that there was a lot of concern about that before we actually came out. Like, is this guy too much of an asshole? And this was kind of before the days of Breaking Bad or shows like that. So you know, the idea of a protagonist who is not necessarily that likable but is still relatable is something that maybe wasn't that well sort of established yet at that point. But I remember there were things like you know, I think Eurogamer did this compilation, like 2-minute video of just that just called Alan Wake is a Dick, and it's just like these different moments where he just goes around just, you know, shouting at people who try to help him or punching people in mid-conversation, like that man has no impulse control and just, you know, things like that. But at the same time, it's also something that I think gave the game a lot of its character, and it's something that a lot of people have enjoyed about it. I mean, there are a lot of people who don't necessarily like the character that much, but they like to see what he becomes, and they like to see how he, you know, like sort of the moments of, I don't know, enlightenment that he has every once in a while, and just like how he's struggling to be a better person. And that's something that I think changes a little bit. Like, when you're watching somebody do that passively, like on a TV show, it's a little easier to see them do horrible things, because like nobody really wants to be Walter White. I think like that he's pretty much like the worst person you can imagine. And if you actually have to be him, like that changes things for people a little bit. And that's something that is a little bit difficult for, I think, some people to try to kind of accept that, just like, now I'm not a good person and now I have to do these horrible things. I mean, granted, like Alan Wake doesn't do a fraction of the horrible things that Walter White does, so it's a little bit easier, but I think that's kind of something that I would like to play, somebody who is like utterly morally compromised and is just not capable of handling his shit at all. It's just kind of scrambling to get by. I think that's interesting, and it's something that when you do that in an interactive environment, I think that's something that you can, even if you don't really explore the full depth of that, it's something that for a player easily in their head kind of spins into something much larger, and like little things that they do that the game doesn't really acknowledge in any way, kind of easily turn into like a larger narrative inside the player and say, hey, like about how much of a horrible person you were. I think that's something you can do in, for example, in Skyrim, where you can do all sorts of horrible things if you're playing like a character who's not nice, and the game doesn't really understand that you're doing them. Like the idea that you're taking, like say, shoplifting cheese from a poor man, sorry, not like pickpocketing cheese from a poor man and just throwing it in a well. Just you don't want the cheese, but you don't want the other guy to have it either. Like that doesn't work. And the game doesn't understand what you're doing, but you do, and then you just go like, okay, now I'm a horrible person, yay. And that's something that a lot of games that aren't really designed to acknowledge it in any way also like still have a lot of opportunities for that. Like I know people who have played games where they just want to be an asshole and then they just go around and shoot out the windows of like innocent people and just like, that's gonna cost you $1,000. Like,
Anne, are you going to?
Yeah, I think that as people who create interactive experiences, it is a given that no matter how much we try to put the experience on rails, it's just not going to stay that way. When you're writing a novel, you're in charge of the whole experience right up until the point where it goes out the door, and even at that point, it's no longer your own because other people's interpretations and your audience's interpretation is going to come into the mix. When we're doing games, we're trying to generate emotional investment from people. We're trying to create emotions that people will feel. And we can't control what those reactions and emotions will be. So while we're creating the experience, we can try to codify it and say, hey, this is a story on rails and this is what we want you to experience. We just can't force people to do that. Which is why like Skyrim is a great example of it. It's like, yeah, there's a crit path somewhere over there, but everyone just goes and do what they want. When we're doing RPGs, we have these, these complex narratives for crit path, but we always make a point of adding a lot around it to allow players the room to go make the experience their own. And I think as long as we have created a space where someone can just either go through the whole experience and invest in it the way we meant for them to do, or find a room to putter in and collect their cheese and be happy, we've done our job. We've done something good.
Yeah, there's also headcanon. Like, somebody can have the exact same choices through, for example, Mass Effect. I did everything that my friend did, but we had completely different experiences because in my head, this is what my Shepherd was like. Yeah.
It's basically, as writers, we go, this is what we meant for it to be, but we can't tell people, so this is how you have to interpret it. We have to allow for them to go, no, this is what I see in this character. So say you wrote a straight character and someone goes, no, that character's totally in the closet. Awesome, that's what you're seeing. Like, my personal preference as a writer is to go, as long as you're punching up, not down when you're doing those interpretations, awesome. But I can't even dictate that.
No, it's true, that's true.
And also, fan fiction.
that was going to be the next point. Like, so how do we feel about fan transmedia tie-ins, let's call them?
Right.
Fan fiction, deviant art, etc. I mean, do any of you like go out and find that, get examples from it, think like, oh, that's how they interpret that character, interesting. I'll remember that for the next time, or do we avoid it?
I'm going to be jump right out there because I wrote fan fiction long before I became a professional game writer. I think it's awesome. I think it's absolutely awesome. I avoid everything related to the IP I'm working on for legal reasons.
Yes.
You can't go there. I'll look at fan art because that's okay, but all of the writing, you stay away from it, and that's it. I love talking with players about their experiences and their headcanon. I love seeing what they care about. And I will go and look at the fan fiction of other IPs because yes, it's still cool. And there's a social, look down on the nose of fan fiction under the impression that it's bad. It's not true. There are really excellent writers in the world of fan fiction, and you're missing out if you're not checking it out.
Yeah, let's just
weeding through
remember-
everything to find the good stuff.
Yeah, let's just remember Jim Butcher started as a fanfic writer, and look where he is today.
There's a lot, like Cassandra Clare started as a fan
Yeah,
fiction
Naomi
writer. There's a
Novik,
lot.
Laurel Henley.
Essia Hinton has written some fan fiction there. She won't tell us why.
Yeah. So, I mean, what about the rest of you?
Project Untold has its roots in the fan fiction and fan art community. I went and I sought out these communities to see what they were doing, and I found that they were creating spaces for themselves within these games that were ignoring them largely. So they would play a game and there weren't any, queer characters or characters of color in it. So they were going off and writing their own stories and creating their own art and sometimes manipulating videos and stuff to make that game world and that game story what they wanted it to be. And I found some really interesting sub-communities that were being exploited in some ways. You'll get me talking about K-pop sometimes, but that is an industry that understands how to use its fans. I mean, they have them, watching a video 5 million times, and all the fans get out of that is, an extra 30 seconds of footage of their favorite idols. but the company gets endorsements and money and awards from YouTube and stuff like that, and it's a huge money-making thing for them to channel this power of the fans. And so I was looking at that and trying to think how I could take that creativity and energy that these people had and this need to tell their own stories, and what could we do with that? And that's how Untold was born. We're like, we need to get these people writing their own stories and to give them the tools to do that. And so that's what it's all about. So I'm 100% in favor of fan fiction.
I think it's a great way to get players engaged and kind of into your game and your space. As I said, with City of Heroes, we would solicited stories from players, and we would take the best and publish them either in the City of Heroes comic or on our website. With Wizard, it's much less of that, again, partly for the idea of wanting to kind of, for legal reasons and not be too tired, taken off the path of what we're trying to do. But it also kind of, I think, one way it branches out into YouTube streamers. And I never had a real sense of how I could watch people play our games before, and now I'll watch a couple of them when we release like a big chapter, and they're not being sort of serious into the story, and yet it's still really cool when they like hit a moment that's cool and they're kind of quiet and they respond to it and woohoos or cries or oh my god I can't believe that guy or whatever. But it's a really fascinating way of actually seeing people take our stuff and how that's being experienced, being able to kind of witness it almost firsthand.
I'm kind of conflicted about fanfic in general. I wrote some starter fanfic when I was like 15 or 16, so I have done my own sort of penance as far as that goes. But like it is like I always have this impulse where you're like, well, if you guys are interested in writing, why don't you write something that's your own stuff? And at the same time, if somebody were to come to me and like, hey, do you want to write like 10 issues of Batman? I would go, yes, God, yes. And it's not really that different. Like, I mean, it's not like Batman is my character, like anything. Like, even if I got that chance, like nobody would imagine that, oh, now it's like, that guy's Batman. Like, so I don't know. I do get a bunch of stuff sent to me every once in a while. Like people send me fanfic and stuff like that. It's a little bit different for me because, just Finland just isn't as litigation happy, so I can look at that stuff and not like get immediately sort of sued to oblivion. But it's kind of weird for me because I'm kind of anal about like consistency and just like the canon of things, especially when it's something that I'm working on. So it always just like creates like this weird cognitive dissonance in me if I see something like that. Also, a lot of porn. Like, okay, like, thank you. Like Rule 34 is well in effect. And also it's interesting like how far some people are like they have like this internal idea of what these characters really are. For example, Alan Wake has his best friend who is this like annoying dude named Barry, and he like. And sort of Alan Wake is on this mission to kind of like figure out what happened to his wife, and that's kind of like the only thing that really motivates him is just kind of fixing his life so he can get his like marriage back together. That's kind of the root of it. And at the same time, I get these people who are like absolutely no, he's gay. Yeah, they're totally doing it, and it's kind of like okay, that like there's not a lot you can say. That's like it doesn't take anything away from me, but it kind of feels like you're maybe ignoring like 80% of the character's motivation right there, but okay.
Yeah. So we got a question from the hashtag, and this will be our last before we open up Q&A, so it's very good. So thank you to Gamers Nexus. How do you facilitate a player's decision to deviate from plot without detracting from the quote-unquote core experience? So how do you facilitate that and still get the core story out to players?
I don't know that you can control that. I mean, it's like what they were saying, you have the critical path in there and they can choose to take it or not. I mean, I guess you could strip away everything but that and like channel them down. But I think even in that case, players are still gonna play the game they want to play and get what they want out of it. Things like environmental clues, like you guys were discussing. Like I know in Guild Wars 2, there were a lot of areas that we set up very deliberately with just sort of a sketched in scene, and you had to sort of fill in the details yourself. And we would see people role playing there a lot. Like you would find like a grave with an inscription on it, and someone weeping nearby, and just enough so that you could form your own conclusion. And people would do that all the time, and those were just sort of deliberate set pieces for role playing. So that's one thing you can do.
I think it really depends on the genre of game you're making, but speaking from RPGs, I mean, I think DEI is a great, example of that, where there's a crit path, there are certain throttle points where you're forced back into main narrative, but other than that, you can explore as long as you want. There's a reason why at the start when DEI came out, everyone on Twitter was saying, get out of the hinterlands. It's because people spent 25 hours plus there, right? And that's allowed for. You just allow for it, people to explore and then eventually go back to the crit path, and that's when you take over sometimes, but outside of that, just do what you want.
I don't think we're quite there yet in some ways. I think some games like Crowfall, which I don't know if you guys know about, it's an upcoming Kickstarter thing out of Austin, may have something that plays in that. I mean, their idea is that you have a persistent character, these eternal heroes, but the worlds will die, they will, and you'll have to kind of come back into a new world. So they're doing a lot of territorial stuff, a lot of you stake out your claims and you're trying to make yourself the biggest, toughest guild, on the world, but then the world's going to blow up and you have to start over again, and you're able to take some of your experience, forward. And I think things that are more sandboxy obviously give you that chance, but anytime there's a strong narrative.
There's a game that was on Kickstarter called Hero Generations, which is based on that concept, right? You basically, each generation, you get to take some stuff with you to the next generation, but you basically decide where you take that to. I haven't played it yet. I think it's being released while we're here. So I'm like just sitting there going, I don't want to play it.
Rogue Legacy does some of that too.
Yeah.
And Massive Chalice coming out soon.
Yeah, for us it's kind of different because we don't really do open world stuff, and the reason we don't do it, Alan Wake was actually supposed to be an open world title in the beginning, and the reason we made it linear was mostly just that we wanted to do something that was like a tense thriller kind of thing, and it's really hard to maintain that if the player can just wander off the path. The kind of thing where, the kidnapper calls you like we're gonna kill your wife if you don't show up at, this spot at at midnight, and then the player goes, okay, but I'm gonna go fishing. Like, it's like, okay, and of course, like, we can't actually do the thing where, the kidnapper follows through on that, because then then you just go back to checkpoint or something, and that's not a lot of fun for anybody. So or you can do things like, let's say that you have like a secret meeting and you're supposed to be really quiet and everything's going to be like on the down low, and then you show up for the meeting in a monster truck, which is something you can do in an open world game, and it's something you just kind of roll with. But if you're really trying to do something that is really, really tightly paced and really atmospheric and just kind of, just concentrating on whatever moment the player is in at the moment, then you do lose a lot of freedom. So for us, most of the time, if the player doesn't want to follow along on the story, that pretty much means that then they aren't just going along the path at all. Like they're just staying in that room, or maybe going, backtracking to a certain point. But if they keep going to the only next place that's really available to them, and sometimes we do kind of make the path wider, but it never gets so wide that you can't kind of see the other edge of the path, so to speak. It's very different for us. So, like, we kind of fail the player in that front, I guess. Sorry.
They know what they're getting into.
But they should.
All right, I'm afraid we're out of time, but we will stick around and answer more questions. So thank you all for coming. We all have Twitter handles, I believe. I'm at Camhar with 2 R's. It's my barbarian name.
And that's Nexus.
At J Scoble.
Nobody wants to hear my Twitter handle.
Everybody wants to hear Mickey's Twitter handle.
My Twitter handle is Mickey, MIKKI, R&D.
There you go. Okay, thank you.